Hi, and welcome back to This Week in Voice, Season 9, Episode 11. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice, General Partner of Project Voice Capital Partners, and excited to be your host. For the show, we've got a great panel of guests that we've invited on, and really excited for the roundtable. And some really interesting stories this week as well. I'm going to give each one of these folks a chance to introduce themselves and tell us who they are and who they're with. And Brian Cotton, I'm going to start with you. Take a moment, tell us who you are, tell us what you do, tell us who you do it with.
Okay, thanks, Bradley, and thanks again for the invitation. So I'm Brian Cotton. I'm with Frost & Sullivan. We're a market analysis and advisory firm. Wear a lot of hats there. My primary hat that I wear is I'm in charge of the operational aspects of our advisory business. Been with the firm for, in dog years, a long time, since 96. Started covering IT and telecoms and kind of kept my hand in that pot the entire time. And AI and its various incarnations has been part of that. Prior to my time at Frost & Sullivan, I was an academic. I was at the University of Southern California doing my grad work and being a research fellow in psychology. So very happy to be here today and looking forward to a really good conversation. Thanks again.
Brian, it's great to have you. And you and I might have had this conversation at some point. I don't remember, but I've been to Vancouver a couple of times. It's a phenomenal place. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Jeff Towns. Jeff, say hello. Tell us who you are. Tell us who you're with.
Hey, everybody. Jeff Towns joining you from the north side of Dallas, Texas. I'm with a company called Credera. We're a full suite management and technology consulting company, and I lead our cloud business. And so a lot of what I do these days is try and keep pace with what's happening in the AI ecosystem, how people are using data and AI to do new things. We certainly have some of those topics on the show today. Certainly an interesting season. Microsoft is Inspire is happening right now. Google had their conference a few weeks ago. Amazon's is coming up in a couple of weeks. So interesting to see how some of the technology evolution that's happening is influencing how folks like all of us are using technology to make things happen. So appreciate you having us on the show today.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to join us. And Brad McCormick, honored to have you on the show as well. Take a moment, tell us who you are, tell us who you do it, tell us what you do, and tell us who you do it with.
Sweet. Hello, world. So my name is Brad McCormick. I, too, am in Dallas, Texas, but I'm more downtown by White Rock Lake. So I am a marketing consultant. I have a small marketing consultancy called 10Louder, which is a reference to Spinal Tap, if you know that movie from the 80s. And the metaphor is kind of like how companies approach technology almost from a gimmicky standpoint. You know, it goes to 11. And the thesis of 10Louder is we need to use technology correctly. You really need to understand the fundamentals of the business and the category. I also teach marketing at Southern Methodist University here in Dallas, Texas. I teach digital marketing strategy and performance management. Just finished the class for the semester and actually did a webinar this week on artificial intelligence and its impact on marketing workflows and team management and so forth. So really great topics, and excited to talk about them with you guys today.
Appreciate it, Brad. And between you and Jeff, we don't need any Cowboys talk on here. It's Tennessee Titans only or up in here. Yeah, appreciate you. Appreciate all of y'all. And with that, we'll get into the news. And I'm going to read this headline from story number 1. This is from The Verge. Microsoft rebrands Bing Chat to Copilot to better compete with ChatGPT. The subheadline, Microsoft has settled on Copilot as its main brand for its AI chatbot after months of trying to push Bing Chat. So I'm going to go in the same order that I went through for the introduction. So Brian, I'm going to start with you. I guess, first of all, what, if anything, stood out to you just from the article? It was an interesting piece. And your thoughts on whether Microsoft has the ability. Obviously, it's weird because Microsoft is a majority investor in OpenAI. It's a little little kind of inbred, but does Microsoft, in your opinion, have the ability to do what they're trying to do and compete head to head against ChatGPT? And frankly, does anybody have that ability?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's a tough one because Microsoft is obviously a big investor in OpenAI. It was $13 billion or in counting or something like that. And OpenAI is giving Microsoft a lot of access to its tech, right? And that's integrated into applications, Azure. I mean, so the idea that Microsoft is competing with ChatGPT, OpenAI, I'm having a struggle with that. Was watching Satya Nadella last night on the Microsoft Ignite on YouTube, and he built this presentation around the Copilot stack, right? And I see the Copilot as the way that Microsoft is delivering on its mission statement: empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. It's this AI-powered personal assistant. Is ChatGPT trying to do the same thing, OpenAI? I don't think so. So, I don't see them necessarily as trying to compete head to head. So, my take is that with this story, I think it's more about a brand shift, right? A way to pivot AI deeper into the enterprise, right? It's about search. Copilot's about a lot more. It's about search. It's about empowering the enterprise and the consumer user. So, I think that what I'm taking away from the story and the move is not so much that this is a story of competition between Microsoft and OpenAI. I think it's more a story about how Microsoft is going to pivot deeper into the enterprise using the Copilot brand.
Yeah, no, I really like your thoughts on that, and just how you presented, how you sort of restructured that, even just the way you're even thinking about that. And Jeff, I want to ask you the same question. What, if anything, in particular stood out from the article itself, in particular, but just in general, your thoughts on, you heard what Brian said about what Microsoft's trying to do, dive in deeper on the enterprise. Do you agree with that? Do you, to what extent do you agree with that? And just share with us your perspective.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Brian as a starting point. I don't necessarily see Microsoft and OpenAI as competitors per se. I think where Microsoft has the advantage here, is they own the user experience. And what we really see them doing is connecting the desktop, the browser, the enterprise touch points, inside Office and otherwise, to really use that context and elevate the experience for users. And OpenAI can't do that. They don't have those touch points with the end customer. They rely on what we call the prompt, or the question that the user provides, as really the only context they can offer. So I don't necessarily see them as competitors. Maybe a couple of things that did stick out to me. One, Microsoft's strength historically has been making things simple for users, and I do think they're on the journey of simplification. They're breaking down some of the boundaries and walls between different places you can use similar technology. That's historic. That's a big, long time strength of Microsoft, is making hard things easy for end users. And most of us probably use their products every day in some way in the office. Even if you're not necessarily using them for email, you're probably interacting with other parts of their ecosystem. And so I think they have a real strength in this area, and we'll see them hopefully bring that technology to the masses and make it more approachable in enterprise. But I think I couldn't help but think back. I'm old, and there was a different parallel journey that happened about 20 years ago, where absolutely everything in their product suite became branded with .NET. So of course, .NET for geeks like me, that's a development framework to build end solutions. But they had Windows.NET, and they had Microsoft.NET, and they had Visual Studio.NET, which was their development environment. And it really actually became very confusing what was what, because everything became so ubiquitously branded with a common moniker, .NET, that it was hard to tell what you were actually using at any moment in time, and they moved away from it. I can't help but wonder if the same thing will happen here, if in their journey to simplify, they're actually taking something that is complex and trying to mask that complexity instead of actually simplify and use a brand as the bridge, and whether users will follow them in that journey. So we'll see. We'll see whether the lessons from 20 years ago come back to haunt them, or whether this journey is a little more fluid.
Well, it's interesting you would point out kind of some of the branding issues. I was actually thinking about that, but coming from a different angle. In a nearby room, there is an Xbox One hardware device. Now tell me, with the name Xbox One, what number in the sequence of that hardware do you think that actually is? There's a little bit of confusion with that, and so sometimes the branding with Microsoft maybe leaves a little bit to be desired, but your points are well taken. And Brad McCormick, coming to you, you've heard two great sets of comments, really interesting article, really kind of interesting premise. Want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think I would take a slightly contrarian view. I do see this a competitive move. The rebranding, the article literally says to better compete with ChatGPT. I think, Microsoft, in class, we talk about from search standpoint, Google has dominant market share, has had dominant market share for a decade plus, and Bing is this little sliver, right? And if Bing can increase search volume by 1%, it is hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And I think the expectation was, if we put ChatGPT into Bing, it's going to allow us to get some more of that of that search volume, which hasn't happened. And then, in additionally, even though, and I think to Brian's point, it's a little weird because Microsoft is funding OpenAI, but nevertheless, there's lots of friendly competition among Silicon Valley. I think Google and Apple have gone and co-create stuff and so forth. I think this clearly says that Microsoft sees ChatGPT as competition, and very quickly, ChatGPT is gaining this cultural lexicon like Google, where it's becoming a verb, and I'm going to Google it. Or, I'm going to go to Kinko's. And once you reach that threshold, it's hard to overcome it. It's interesting too, because the byline says Microsoft has settled on Copilot as its main brand for its AI chatbot after months of trying to push Bing Chat. I think if anything, it says that the Bing brand just isn't that compelling in the marketplace, and people do not associate Bing with cutting edge technology. At least from a search standpoint. It is not rebranding is a very, very expensive thing, especially in the technology field. And, ideally something like Bing has a brand equity. So, Microsoft is famous for a master brand strategy where you have, Microsoft, and then you have Microsoft Office and Microsoft Windows and so forth. So all of those business lines benefit from that Microsoft halo. One of the departures was Xbox. You brought up Xbox. They made this kind of a sub-brand strategy where we're going to, Xbox is still connected to Microsoft, but it's its own thing. And that sub-brands are hard to do. You have to have a very strong master brand, but Xbox is textbook example of launching a sub-brand where you're trying to kind of break apart from the master brand and appeal to a certain demographic like gamers. And I think Microsoft is trying to do that same formula here with Copilot. I think they have an uphill battle because I've never heard of Copilot. You've never heard of Copilot. I'm not used to searching for Copilot, but I think ultimately this shows that there is an urgency here to own AI in the culture. And for whatever reason, Microsoft, who probably is more responsible or as responsible as OpenAI because they funded it, they're not getting the cultural benefit. And so I think there's some desperation here that we quickly need to find ways of getting our approach to AI in the mouths and minds of consumers. So I think it reinforces the urgency and how quickly things are going in this space.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's interesting, right? Because as we've discussed on this show more than once, if you were to line up 100 people certainly generally, but let's just say working in technology, and you ask them what is AI, you're going to get 100 different answers, right? You're not going to get. You might have some people who are close to each other, but it's all grown so fast that you don't even have people who can even agree on what AI is, much less what is competition with what is viewed as a dominant AI framework. If I had to make a list of what is ChatGPT's competition, or if all of us, got out a pen and paper and quietly wrote down who are the main competitors to ChatGPT, we probably have a lot of divergence across our answers. And part of that is a compliment to OpenAI and how fast they're moving. It really reminds me a lot of the Alexa era, where you had a lot of people comment in that time, 2016 on into 2019-ish, 2020 into the pandemic, where you can't even keep up. There's all sorts of new hardware they're experimenting with, all sorts of new features, and you can't keep up. It feels like that with ChatGPT and OpenAI as well. So to frame something as competition is as all of y'all have noted, kind of, it challenges you because it's testing the fundamental foundation of how you define all of this stuff. And go ahead.
I think one thing is, in tech, there's contradictory principles. So there's like first mover advantage, right? So the first person to in a marketplace has huge dominance. There's another converse to that, which is you don't want to be the first search engine, which was like Ask Jeeves. They had first mover advantage or whatnot. You want to be the last search engine, which is, Google, or you want to be the last social network. However, I think in this case, there is pretty amazing first mover advantage. So kind of your analogy, if I ask someone, name a cryptocurrency, most people are going to say, I don't know, or they're going to say Bitcoin. And when in fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands of other cryptocurrencies out there. And right now in our culture, I believe for the most part, if you ask 100 people, have you heard of AI? Yes. Name an AI platform. Most people are going to say ChatGPT. And I think very few people were saying Bing. And I think that was their issue. And I think, and they attributed that to, we're not branding this thing. We're not telling our story correctly. I don't know how many people are aware that Bing is ChatGPT. So I think
going to Bing, and I wanted to mention this off the heels of what you said earlier as well. When I think about Bing, let me do word association with Bing. Don't use it. Never going to use it. That's my immediate word association. And I while you were talking, Brad, to begin with, I was thinking, why do I not use Bing? Two reasons. First of all, I'm a loyal Gmail user. So I'm already in the ecosystem and my mind immediately goes to Google as a result of that. So that's about 80% of it. But the other 20% is that, I mean, maybe I've just missed it, but I haven't seen any sort of Microsoft narrative on, if I go to use Bing, like my browser is going to be like real surprised, like why are you going to this rogue site? If I go to Bing and I experiment with it, like what do I get? Like, am I going to get new search results? Like nobody's ever, I'm sure somewhere in some marketing they've said that you get, better search results, or they try to quantify it, but I've never seen it. Nor have I ever heard anyone talk about it. So that's kind of how I view that. And so to your point, when you can manage to lock somebody in, actually to all of you made this point in different ways. If you can manage to lock somebody into an ecosystem, you make it a lot easier to do iterative steps on top of that. And so anyway, those are my thoughts. I want to open the floor to any of the three of you just for any additional comments.
So I think Brian was onto something that we're not necessarily talking about here, though. One of his comments was it's a move deeper into enterprise. I think that's the loudest headline. So the problem with Bing wasn't Bing. The problem with Bing is monetizing it. AI is incredibly expensive. There is going to be a per user cost on using Copilot, on using Google Duet, that is charged to the enterprise at scale. They know they'll reach into some homes by charging the enterprise. We sometimes use our work assets for personal needs. And I think really it's a change in commercial strategy and how they actually monetize this. You know, I have to admit, I used Bing search yesterday so that I could get ChatGPT incorporated into it. The Google solution doesn't work quite as well. I am not usually a Bing user, but once in a while, you know, I'll take a look at it to take advantage. But really, I think it's a change in commercial strategy. I think the other thing to note here is why Copilot. You know, I think Brad mentioned he doesn't know Copilot as a brand. Maybe some of you don't. Geeks like me do. Why? Because it came from GitHub. That is the original AI assistant solution inside GitHub, which is part of the technology ecosystem. And I think one of the things we see with our clients, and certainly we experience in our own company, and it's my observation in the world at large, is technologists seem to be leading the world in understanding how to do prompt engineering, how to make use of these tools in new ways. Even the posts on LinkedIn require some technology know-how to understand the parlance that they're explaining for you know, whether it's refuting your medical bills like we'll talk about here in a minute, or doing something different. You have to be able to follow some instructions and be fluent in technology to make that happen. And I really think maybe Microsoft is trying to go back to their roots. Ballmer called them developers, to lead the way in commercializing some of this and then charge them for the pleasure of doing so. I think that may be the bigger headline, is that they're realizing that consumers and monetizing via advertising is not a winning strategy to build a profitable business with AI.
Yeah, Jeff, I want to pick up on that.
Yeah, well, Brian Cotton, I'm going to give you the last word on this, and then we'll go on to the next story. Fire away.
Okay, I'll be concise. I think the enterprise is the battleground, right? We do an annual tracking survey of IT decision makers, been doing it for a while, and fresh data just came out. One of the interesting things that we're finding is that enterprises now are shifting, right? Whereas before we saw a lot of like sitting on the sidelines, prototyping, checking things out. 2023, we saw for the first time a big shift to we're implementing AI capabilities. And you know, some of the reasons around that are improving operational efficiency and boosting innovation. But some of the restraints that are following or doing that, one of the big ones is the difficulty assessing the ROI. I mean, Jeff, you talked about monetizing the brand. And if you think about it, you know, a CIO, CTO, it's a big decision to invest in AI. And there's this tension between, you know, FOMO, fear of missing out. We're going to miss the boat on AI because all of our competitors are doing it, versus fear of ROI. I don't know what I'm going to get out of this yet. What are the use cases? Where's my gain in productivity? And I think that's where somebody like Microsoft can come in. You know, they own the enterprise space. They can come in with a very serious brand like Copilot and say, okay, this is what you're going to get out of it, versus Bing. Bing is fun. Bing is like, you know, I do this with my daughter, searching for stuff. So I think you're definitely right. It's the enterprise. This is Microsoft's move into the enterprise, and they're going to do it with the Copilot brand.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect. So great comments all the way around, and really interesting story. I doubt we've discussed Copilot for the last time on this show. I'll go out on a limb with that. I'm going to move on to story number 2. This is from Business Insider. The head of the FTC says she used ChatGPT to successfully contest a medical bill. FTC Chair Lena Khan said she successfully used ChatGPT to contest a medical bill. She shared the story on a New York Times podcast when asked about AI experiences that informed her thinking. She has spoken out strongly about the need for AI regulation in the past. I'm going to go in the opposite order that we went in the last story and for the intros. So Brad McCormick, I'm going to start with you, and then Jeff and Brian. I like stories like this. I like to include them on the show. They kind of serve as a Rorschach test for a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to ask you very simply, what did you think of the article? What stood out?
I think, well, one, I think Linda Khan is a fascinating figure. You know, in the tech world, she was seen as this kind of bringing a fresh air to the FTC and technology regulation and so forth. I'm trying to think of what it was, but I think, did she lose? There was some, she went toe to toe with I think maybe Google last year and lost a lawsuit. I don't want to go down those down that rabbit hole, but the point is, she takes a pretty skeptical view of big tech's power. But it's interesting here how she's actually talking about the benefits of big tech. FTC has been pretty vocal, and I've read some stuff on her just about the amount of fraud that's being generated, you know, by AI, especially with regard to medical billing and overpayments and so forth. But, you know, and speaking of Microsoft, the president of Microsoft, his name is Brad something. I forget. I haven't. Who's the president of Microsoft? It's Brad Smith. He has a book called Tools and Weapons, which is a metaphor for technology, that, you know, technology can be used as a tool, a benefit, and technology can be used as a weapon to harm. And I think the fact that the head of the FTC, who's been very critical of technology, is actually talking about the benefits of technology and how it can be used to contest a medical bill, just highlights that at the end of the day, AI is a tool, and it can be used, and it's a tool. Like all digital technology is amplified. It's amplifying the good. So it's amazing that we can now be empowered to contest a medical bill, because if you've ever done that, it is a crazy labyrinth. But at the same time, you know, there is a lot of fraud out there, and there's something with like medical billing where people can emulate, AI can emulate your voice and call the doctor's office and overbill. So to me, it's just how I think it's very mature of her. She's a critic of technology, but here she's openly talking about the benefits of it. So it just reinforces that idea that it can be, it's neither good nor bad. I think it's pretty neutral. It's how we apply this technology.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Jeff, coming to you, same question. Interesting article, kind of a Rorschach test on everything, and so much going on right now. I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so first off, I tried to use ChatGPT last night to see if I could save money in my medical bills. I didn't figure that one out, but it was a really interesting use case to hear about. I hadn't thought of it in that context. You know, I think what struck me, and I'll make a political but non-political comment here, was the leadership she demonstrated. I think a lot of the rhetoric in the world today, in business and politics and in lots of forums, is polarized in one direction or another. And I appreciated a critic being willing to acknowledge some benefits. So we don't have a lot of examples of that out in the community today. And I thought it was a really refreshing moment that she not only found some benefit, but found a place to give her voice to it, to put it on a podcast, to go out and tell the world that she does see some positive to this thing and begin a more balanced dialogue. I think regulation is going to be required. I think we all know that's coming. The government is going to take a while to catch up to what's happening. And so she plays a role, the government plays a role in helping to bring us together to some degree. But I also appreciated that she could see the opportunity in doing that, and maybe even create some urgency to start figuring some of those things out sooner than later. So I thought it was a really great article. One of those moments that I have children, I'd like to show them something like that. Is this is what being a leader looks like. I was pleased to see something like that coming up.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting observation as well. You know, yeah, usually it's you get slapped upside the head for daring to compliment somebody that you know, kind of sits diametrically opposed from you, you know, in another faction. But here that's not necessarily the case. Brian, I want to come to you. You've heard two great points so far. Interesting article from Business Insider. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to totally agree with Brad and Jeff. I think it's a cautionary tale. You know, it's a tool. AI, like anything technology, it's a tool. It's good for bad. You can use it for both. You know, the one of the things that kind of struck me on this is relates to a conversation I was having with our cybersecurity analysts a couple of weeks ago. And they were talking about, you know, the soft underbelly of an enterprise is the contact center. because of the capability of a deep voice fake to get in there and do stuff. And kind of a cutting edge of defending against these AI generated deep voice fakes is AI cybersecurity, right? So I'm looking at this, and we're talking about contesting a medical bill. Okay, that's one application. It goes deeper than that, and I think there's a lot of perspective we can take by looking at how do we actually demystify the technology. It's not good or bad inherently, it just is. And what about the people that are using it? And that gets into the ethics and the regulation and so on. So for me, that's what this pointed out in the article, was that, okay, deeper conversation, the tech itself is powerful. Let's figure out how people are going to use it for good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it's interesting to sort of think about, my mind with so many things with LLMs, ChatGPT, anything like that, my mind often goes back to the Alexa era, because for me, that's where I started paying attention to things that some people were calling AI. And at the time when the Echo speaker started coming out, and started to become ubiquitous in American households and beyond, there was conversations about equity. There was conversations about children that grow up. I mean, it was interesting because these same conversations sort of sat in parallel with privacy and security conversations. Like, we have Big Brother in here spying on us, but those conversations were a little bit muted as that technology took off. And you did hear people talk about children that don't have access to this technology are going to be worse off. They're going to not have as good of an education. They're not going to have this computer that they talk to and can learn from, and they're not going to have these feedback loops that are accelerated, that support being smarter and learning at a faster rate, more information. Here, it's kind of echoes of that. That's sort of what I took away from this. I agree with everything that the three of y'all said, but also, I mean, the entire premise of contesting a medical bill is kind of a sophisticated use case, right? Like, that's not a stupid use case. That's not like, tell me, where I can find all of the sports on TV as opposed to a few, you know what I mean? Or it's like, tell me where the nearest Dunkin' Donuts is. It's like this is a sophisticated use case that for people who don't, like, they're intimidated by technology, and so because they are less educated, so they never expose themselves to ChatGPT, so they lose money on things like being able to contest medical bills. It's like the feedback loop grows in against them. It's interesting to sort of ruminate on equity type of issues as it relates to AI access. So that's kind of where my mind goes, and I'll open the floor.
Yeah, so I think that's fascinating. So, I guess the gulf between the have and the have-nots. And, earlier we said how technology amplifies, right? And so in many ways, AI is only going to amplify that gulf. I think a good metaphor of what you're saying is taxes. So I can do my taxes myself and I'll pay a certain amount, but if I can afford a CPA, and there's only certain people that can afford a CPA, but if you can afford a CPA, you can actually end up paying less taxes. And so that actually becomes a tax on the poor who can't afford the sophisticated, tax strategies, if you will. But I think similar to your point with, the medical bill, there is a certain sophistication that's required to use AI to fight fraudulent or bad medical bills. And there's a barrier to entry there. And so there is and that, potentially, and that's something we need to worry about. I mean, at the end of the day, AI is power, and the ability to use AI is power. And if you don't have, and the people that are able to properly leverage AI in their business and their homes and their communities are going to gain more power. And that's going to potentially further that divide, the gulf between the have and the have-nots, and that's one of the many things that we need to figure out. And instead, ideally, to your point, it should make the world more equitable. But I think there's a chance that it's if it's on autopilot, it's probably going to do the opposite.
And I'll open this up to Brian and Jeff. You can get their last comments as well. But I want to throw in something here. There was a study that I always think about with stuff like this as well, and I forget exactly how it was constructed, but it's cited all the time with regard to autonomous vehicles and the work that goes on with those. Essentially, when autonomous vehicles exist, researchers have pretty much figured out through studies, and I'm not even going to attempt to talk about how they were set up because I'll just get it wrong. But in essence, they've conducted some research which demonstrates that a normal person would think that an autonomous vehicle, a self-driving vehicle, will result in less cars, less traffic, less utilization of the road for a number of different reasons. But the reality is that it's almost, it appears obvious from different research that it'll be the exact opposite, because what will happen is if I had an autonomous vehicle and I need to go somewhere, then I'll have it drive me to that destination. And rather than search out for parking, I know I'm only going to be in this building for 20 minutes. I'm just going to have my autonomous vehicle circle around the block over and over and over again until I come out. And so because why have it park? And it's all about my convenience anyway, in this selfish way that we all live. So it's like, I'll just wait and have it circle around the block and then I'll leave. And there's a gazillion other sort of use cases that people have realized as they thought about autonomous vehicles that will come into being that unfortunately nobody ever thought about. And I think there's echoes in what you're saying, Brad. As AI becomes more and more available and known, there will be all sorts of unexpected repercussions of that we need to watch out for, and having equitable access to it is a good way to kind of get out in front of that. And that's at the heart of what I heard you just saying. Brian and Jeff, want to give you the opportunity to provide additional comments as well before we wrap up with the last story and conclude.
Sure. Jeff, I'll go on this one. Huge power in AI. All right. So, part of this is how do we control that power? I'm looking for an analog. And Brad, you talked about autonomous vehicle and the power there. What's an analog? Commercial aircraft, right? We train people to pilot commercial aircrafts to control that huge power. Maybe we train people specifically as a career track to control or harness or direct the AIs. And this is beyond just regulation. Maybe it's a career path for somebody. But I think that's one of the things we need to consider is how we're going to control this, even as we push the developers and the creators in ethical guideline directions.
Perfect. Yeah, and Jeff, I'll give you the last word.
Hey, don't fear the reaper. We look at this as a gap. My takeaway, if I go back to my parents, my in-laws, and other people who feared having to do everything on a computer and learn late in their career how to use computers, it's ubiquitous. My children have computers now in school that they carry around and do everything, and doesn't really feel like a barrier at all. There's certainly an opportunity in that, but that's a public school education. I think what we are looking at is a divide today. If you go back to the first story and look at what Microsoft is trying to do and lean into the enterprise, if this becomes a ubiquitous part of knowledge work, if every knowledge worker has access, and even warehouse workers checking their email have access to this technology, if you can carry it on your phone and use it when you're using your digital devices, I think in a real way, it's going to reach more people than we currently expect. What seems hard now will get simpler. We'll learn, the models are going to get better. Right now, we're talking to 5-year-olds or maybe even 12-year-olds. Soon we'll be talking to adults in terms of the sophistication. And so the knowledge required to interact will be less. This is going to get easier. So I would say we ought not fear too much the gap we're creating. instead just lean in and continue to learn through it and see whether, humanity can adapt to it in a real way.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's a great place to leave that. And so I want to wrap up. And before I do, I want to mention a specific additional story. I'm going to just read the headline, not for discussion purposes, but just for sort of documentarian purposes. This is from TechCrunch. Airbnb acquires secretive firm launched by Siri co-founder. Well, the Siri co-founder is Adam Shire, who's a venture partner of ours with Project Voice Capital Partners, co-founder of Siri, co-founder of Bixby, co-founder of Change.org, co-founder of Sentient Technologies, and the King Midas of this space. But he also happens to be a phenomenal individual. And so we're happy for him. If you read the article or look up information about that, this is a company that almost nobody knew even existed, that was acquired for $200 million by Airbnb with a grand total of 12 employees. So hats off to Adam and the team for that, and wanted to give them a shout out here at the end of the show. So Brian, Jeff, Brad, thank y'all for taking the time to be part of This Week in Voice with us, sharing your experience and your expertise with not just me, but with the audience as well. It's greatly appreciated.
Awesome. Had fun.
Great. Thanks.
For this weekend, appreciate all of y'all. For This Week in Voice, Season 9, Episode 11. Thank you for listening. If you have been listening on your podcast provider of choice, thank you for watching us. If you've been watching on YouTube, until next time.